So I'm very happy to be having a dialogue, a conversation today with Boysen Hodgeson. And Boysen is involved with the Mankind Project, which, as far as I know, has been a project that's been developing in America mainly, but now internationally since the 70s, I think.
Early 80s.
Early 80s, okay. And yeah, I was very interested to connect with Boysen and find out about his work with the Mankind Project, but particularly with something that they call the New Warrior Training, because it resonates so much with my work with the Awaken Life Men's Collective, and yeah, and as this, we've decided to create a documentary to really put our experience and our learnings and discoveries out there to a wider audience. I'm really interested to connect with other men, other leaders who are leaning into this whole theme of what it means for us to inhabit a fully embodied, integrated masculinity in a time where masculinity generally gets a bad rap. So welcome, Boysen.
Thank you so much.
And maybe we could begin, maybe you could just begin by telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey, how you ended up being a facilitator with the Mankind Project.
Do you want the 1 minute version or the 5
Well,
minute
the one
version?
or maybe 3 minute version.
The 3 minute version. Thank you. First I just have to say you pronounced my last name perfectly.
Hodgeson.
Yes, which is beautiful and not always done. So thank you for that. I'm Boysen Hodgeson. I have been connected to the Mankind Project since 2004. Was when I went through the New Warrior Training Adventure, the Mankind Project's weekend experience. And the personal story for me, origin story for me, is I grew up surrounded by boys and men. I have 6 brothers.
Wow.
Dad who's still in my life. I had stepdads through my life and 2 different stepfathers. So I was surrounded by male energy and masculinity in different forms and different how that showed up in different ways in my life. And I got into my kind of early midlife, my 30s, and recognize and ended up in a place where I had no close male friends. I was largely disconnected from the men, even in my own family. And I had a longing for a place where I could look honestly at what was actually going on with me outside of the bullshit story that I like to tell myself about what was going on with me. And I was in the very early part of a relationship that is now my 17-year marriage to my wife, and recognizing that patterns that I had been doing in every relationship I'd been in with a woman were already starting to repeat 6 months into this relationship. So I was lonely, isolated, didn't have a sense of what I was doing next, and was already screwing up the relationship I was in. And it was like, okay, I'm ready to do something. And I had been hearing about the New Warrior Training Adventure because a whole bunch of other men in my family had already done it.
Oh, okay.
And as soon as they had done it, they were like, Boysen, you got to do this thing. You got to do this thing. I was like, no, thanks, no, thanks, no, thanks. I'll stick to my books. I'll stay in my head. I'll stay disconnected. But when the pain got enough for me to cross the threshold, I crossed the threshold and did that weekend in 2004 and have kind of never looked back.
Wow, interesting. And so maybe that it would be good to just hear from you, what the warrior training consists of. Get a sense to give the what the viewers here a sense of what it's about. but then also you could also share the impact it had on you going through
Yeah.
that process.
Yes. So we're now, Mankind Project started in 1984, 85 in the middle of America, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it was three guys with wildly different experiences: a psychologist, an ex Marine who was a General Motors uh, engineer, and a curriculum studies professor
Hmm.
who had all been doing their own personal growth journeys and had been in some spaces together doing some different types of development work at that time. And Bill Kauth, who was the therapist, had a lightning bolt moment where he said, "Where are the spaces for the men?"
Mm. Yeah, and I've
And
heard of Bill Kauth. I remember hearing about him.
yes, yeah, he's still around, still doing community building work, still connected to MKP and doing
Oh,
some of
good.
this work as well. Yes. And Rich Tosi, one of the other founders, is also still alive, still connected to the organization, and still leaning in helping us to continue to evolve. But they came up with this idea for a Wild Man Weekend,
Mm.
which became the New Warrior Training Adventure within a year or so. And it really caught fire among men who, many of whom were already sitting in kind of men's communities, men's councils in the US.
Mm.
And it spread like wildfire through the Midwest and then jumped to California and jumped to the Northeast. And now we have 23 training centers in the US.
Wow.
And with from the mid 80s to the early 90s, then jumped the pond to UK and Ireland, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland. We have a small community growing in Spain. We're in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa,
Wow, that's
Mex-
amazing.
Mexico, driven by the fire and passion that men get out of participating in the New Warrior Training Adventure. So
That's incredible. Wow.
yes, it's still growing now, starting to branch out in Central and South America and in Southeast Asia. Um, yeah, exciting. There's still exciting stuff happening there.
And
But
is this
what is it?
training, is it just a weekend?
It is.
Wow.
So this is the New Warrior Training Adventure is Friday evening to Sunday afternoon,
Mhm.
and it is a kind of ritual hero's journey
Mm.
for men. So it takes the shape of uh, a separation from the known world, a descent into the unknown, uh, accompaniment by mentors, team building, an ordeal
Mhm.
through Saturday afternoon, an individual ordeal that every man faces, really faces himself
Mhm.
in the heart of the process.
Mhm.
And then an integration and a return, welcoming into a men's community. And out of that training, starting very early in the 80s, men's groups started being formed.
I
So,
see.
yes,
So
so this is,
a lot of men, when you mentioned all those groups in different countries, it's not just the trainings, it's the men's groups that have developed out of that.
that's right. So we have in the United States about 750 active men's groups, around the
Wow.
globe over 1,000 active men's groups. And these are, at this point, it's it's mostly men who have participated in the New Warrior Training Adventure in our weekend, and
Mhm.
then a growing number of men who haven't yet,
Mm.
uh, who are still sitting with us and doing the work and engaging in the process of building community
Mhm.
out of these kind of core principles of emotional authenticity and connection to higher purpose
Mm.
and integrity and accountability,
Mm.
and something that will certainly vibe with you, embodiment. Like all
Right.
of this kind of practice is rooted in our bodies, and and rooted in learning our emotions through our bodies and learning our desires through our bodies. So that, you know, when I went through the process in 2004, that's what woke up, is my body woke up. I'm a super cerebral, I'm a thinker, I'm a writer, I'm a reader. I had lived in my head most of my life.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yes, right. I was very comfortable there and trapped
Right.
at the same time. And the New Warrior Training Adventure gave me a space where still 18 years later, I can go back and feel viscerally in my body what it felt like to be in that room with those men doing that work at that time.
Wow.
Yes.
So take us through the journey of the weekend then. You know, I'd be very interested to hear some more specifics about how how you do that together, and particularly the confrontation, you know, with the deepest fear, you know, which you mentioned, you know, going through the dark night part of it.
So, and as a guy who engages in sacred ritual, I'm gonna do the sacred. It's the sacred framing of this, right? So I'll take you through the weekend, but I'm not going to take you through the whole weekend.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, as a hero's journey, there's a pretty abrupt separation from the normal world. And on the New Warrior Training Adventure, you kind of enter the space, you're with a group of men, we do carpooling for everybody who arrives. The staff to participant ratio, if there are 25 participants, there will be 30 plus staff.
Wow.
On the training site. So you enter a space that has been created specifically and exclusively for this interaction, for this ritual process. And it starts with a knock on the door and a simple question. If you are ready to do whatever it takes to get what you came here for, knock on that door. And entering that process, there are, you know, within the course of 48 hours, there are about 70 processes that we go through with men on the weekend. It is a pretty intricately staged and managed event. So there will be men kind of moving in and out of the container as you are going through the processes. There's a lot of kind of separation and road of trials. So the Friday night, there's a lot of like kind of hard energy. There's kind of, the intention is that we build a mirror of granite for every man to see himself in.
Wow, that's a great metaphor.
Right? So we want you to look at yourself. We want you to look at the choices that you've made in your life. We're inviting you to see how you set yourself up and how you impact other people with the way that you set yourself up through your choices and actions. So there's a lot about integrity and accountability and choice and risk. What do you risk? What do you not risk? What is that getting you in your life? How have you created the world that you occupy? And into Friday night, we build teams. There's some individual journaling, there's visualizations, there's some team building activities, there's a game that we play late in the night that kind of riles men up and form a container, right? So you know about forming a container, building the heat, building the walls, building that sacred space for men to do what they're there for. Saturday morning, we're up early. We get right into our bodies again. Start engaging in, more individual process, more visualization, more embodied process. We start to look at purpose and purpose in a man's life. We start to look at statements, affirmations about who we are in the world. And that leads into the heart of the weekend, this confrontation, which we call guts.
Mm.
And the guts process is an individual process for every man, and every man has an opportunity to step onto the carpet and do his work.
And that's in front of everybody else?
With the whole container.
Mm.
Yeah. So normally we will split up, so there'll be 2 or 3 carpets going at one time, with different teams of men working with the men on the carpets, and go through an individual process that for me was, and those processes can look at confronting really some core emotional wounds, some core emotional restrictions, some blockage, some turning point that happened, some wound that I carry. For me, that was about getting my sense of joy and passion for living back.
Mm. And how is that process done? Is that through a facilitator challenging the individual?
That is through a facilitator.
Are there any kind of more physical dimensions to that challenge, or is it more in the form of dialogue?
Everyone is different, and pretty much everyone is going to have some embodied practice.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that quite literally looked like pushing through a group of 12 men to get to what I wanted in my life.
Right. And so that was set up by the facilitator. So that it's really the facilitator's has to be very intuitively in touch with, okay, what is it for this guy? How can we dramatize that?
That's right. And the idea of servant leadership. So the idea of, I'm following your process. I'm following where you're going, and I'm getting cues from what you say and how you are and how you're occupying, and I'm following that. And then what I know is that I have the facilities and the men to set up whatever we need to create.
I get it. That's cool.
Right. So, and that, again, having a big staff on the training, that means that we'll have guys there who have done this process and been certified, peer reviewed and certified to lead the process. So they've done 130 of these weekends.
Wow.
And then you'll have guys there who have done 40 of these weekends. You'll have guys there who've done 10 of these weekends. And you'll have guys there who this is the first time they've ever been there since they did their own weekend.
Wow.
Right? All participating, all on some
level.
All
creating the container.
All creating the container. Right?
Yeah.
All creating the space to say, what is it? What is it that you're confronting? Well, there's something with my father. Find a man in this circle who holds that energy. Let's make it happen. Let's
act it out. Yeah.
Let's bring it. So there's a bioenergetics about it. There's a Gestalt kind of about it. Kind of an emotional process. So that embodiment. So that's Saturday afternoon into the evening. Saturday night, there's a celebration and kind of a welcoming and affirmation of the completion of that journey. A better night's sleep on Saturday. Sunday, we're up again, and Sunday process is about integration. So the Sunday process is about really connecting to earth, connecting to self, connecting to what's bigger than us. I'll say spirit. It's any man's beliefs are welcome and non-beliefs are welcome, but there is this sense of verticality, right? There is this sense of above and belowness.
Yeah, that a greater force that's pulling everybody up, you could say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anchoring
I know that very well.
Us up. Yes.
Yeah, that's
what that feels like, right?
Yeah.
In your body. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that's the Sunday, and Sunday is really about cleaning up and integrating and getting back all those things that we set aside on Friday night when we arrived on site, and then getting prepared to go home in a good way. And of course, there's a feast and a celebration at the end, and everybody says hello. And something that was super, super cool for me about that experience is that I had an idea of who the kind of leaders were,
Mhm.
but the way the process is set up, it's not a guru on a stage. It's
Mm,
not that. That is not the experience.
mm.
The guys who are actually there as certified leaders of the weekend, they're over there a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They're hanging back, they're watching everything. So I didn't know until Sunday afternoon who the actual full leader of this thing was,
Interesting.
who his compatriots were in the leadership team, and then how everybody else kind of played out. So there were guys that I created incredibly deep connections with who had just done the weekend 2 months ago,
Right.
you know?
So there's a
And
real collective intelligence guiding the whole thing, it sounds like.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really what the New Warrior training adventure is about. And then, the work has sustained itself and grown because of men's groups. So I
Mm.
completed the NWTA, and about 2 months later I joined a men's group here in Western Massachusetts. And and then it was a whole new hero's journey. It was
Mm.
a whole new process of integrating and remembering what I had done on that weekend,
Mm.
and then learning skills and tools to actually make real the vision and hope and intention and aspiration that I had created for myself
Mm.
during that
And
process.
those groups, are they guided? Is
They
there
are
is there a
peer
leader or
facilitated,
a facilitated? Yeah.
peer facilitated support. So, um, I was lucky. I was a lucky dude. I was in the right place at the right time, and I walked into a men's group that had been running continuously for 12 years already in New England.
Wow.
These
Wow.
guys were old. These guys were old hat. They were kings. I was 32 years old,
So a lot of them
and
have been involved for that long together.
they had been involved. A lot of them went through the same weekend in 1996 in
Mm.
Chicago. They
Mm.
traveled together to Chicago,
Mm.
did the weekend together, and then came back to New England and started a
That's
men's
amazing.
group.
Well, that
Um,
just says everything to me about the power of the training because for a bunch of guys to stick together for that long. I mean, my men's collective has been going, so yeah, about 14 years, 13 years. A lot of men have come and gone.
yeah,
You know? But yeah, I know exactly what you mean about the power of the collective because nowadays, there's guys who've been involved, 8, 9, 10 years. And then there's guys who are right up to guys who are very, very new. But
yeah,
when new men come in now to the container, or if new men come on a men's retreat, and just like you were describing, there's a lot of the men from the group are there.
yep,
There's something transmitted non-verbally. It's just it's spiritual, but also totally physical. It's psychophysical. It's received bodily, and it's that transmission of this brotherhood. And so that sounds fantastic because then you have a kind of natural, like what I like to call a natural hierarchy or a natural verticality
yes,
that's present in the group, assuming everybody's just open to that, and that yeah, you don't necessarily have to have an explicit even leader. It's just that the depth of experience is just naturally transmitted and recognized.
that's
And
exactly it.
yeah, so I can imagine when you stepped into this group and they'd been going for 12 years, it must have been quite a container to come into.
It was a brilliant container to come into, and it's hilarious. This could embarrass some of the guys in the group, but that would be great. Um, it was at this one dude's house
Mm.
in Northampton, Massachusetts, and he had hot tub on his back porch. I'm brand new. I'm 32 years old. I walk into a room with 10 guys, all quite a bit older than me. Most of them
Mm.
quite a bit older than me. Everybody says, hey, big hugs, da, 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 da. And meanwhile, they're stripping off their clothes. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Everybody climbs into the hot tub,
Together,
right?
yeah.
Just at the start of the men's group. And like, that is not every men's group.
Yeah,
This is the only men's group I know about that where this happened. But like, that
yeah,
was my entrance
yeah,
uh, into the experience of this men's group.
yeah.
But what those guys did, one of them was the officiant at my wedding
Oh,
2 years later.
mm,
Those guys brought me in and welcomed me and gave me a seat, opened the seat for me in that group, and they loved the shame out of me for the
mm.
next year and a half.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Mm.
Like that, all the stuff that I had been carrying with me, all of that baggage that I had packed up that I started to open up at the New Warrior Training Adventure,
Mm.
they held the space for me to do that.
Mm.
And they also kept challenging me. And this is what I love about that space that you're talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
right? They kept challenging me, Boysen, you've got leadership in you. Step
Right,
in,
right, right.
bring that,
Yeah,
bring your intuition online, bring
yeah,
your power online, bring
yeah,
your questions online,
yeah.
right? That's what we can give each other as men in those spaces. And I think,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah,
it.
exactly. And that's definitely what I'm passionate about bringing too, because I often say to the guys, look, I don't want a bunch of followers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I might be an inspiration to you. I'm catalyzing something, but I want you to meet me, not by emulating me as a personality, but discovering that passion, that warriorship, that authenticity in yourself. And one of the things that's beautiful to see as our group has developed is some of the guys who've been involved longer, really starting to take responsibility with me for the whole group and the evolution of the group,
Yep.
and then, as you say, that leadership can be shared. And then also it's great to see some of them being inspired to start their own projects and their own coaching. And
Mm.
that's also starting to happen now.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's what happened in your case, because now yeah, maybe tell us a bit about what you're doing now in terms of being a facilitator yourself.
Thank you. So I got very quickly involved. Almost all of what the Mankind Project does is volunteer. So all of our communities are volunteer run. The trainings, not only are we volunteers who go to staff, but we also pay our own accommodations to go,
Mm-hmm.
so that we're not putting that onto participants who are coming to participate in the trainings that we do. Um, so I very quickly, you know, within a year, got into a volunteer position in my local community in New England
Mm-hmm.
and started like leaning in that way. And I was a marketing and copywriter and design guy, like when I started this work. So I complained about the dated marketing that all of these beautiful old guys had put together. And and uh, my inquiries and pushes and volunteering got me into bigger rooms and bigger spaces. So I ended up participating in national and international uh, kind of activities on the marketing side, which led to in 2010, when MKP USA, I work for the Mankind Project USA, when they went looking for a marketing guy, I was right there and stepped into that role, and I've been playing that role for MKP.
Mm-hmm.
And in facilitating, so I've helped to found the group that I'm a part of and two other groups in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And I still have my home group is the Springfield Uprising. So I've been participating in the Uprising now for 14 years. I think that our group
Wow.
is
Wow.
that old now.
Mm.
Yeah. And the space we've been on hiatus because of COVID. for in-person stuff for quite a while, and we just started getting back together in person.
That must be great.
It's fantastic. Yes.
So some of those guys then, because they were involved 12 years prior to you joining, so some of them have been involved in it for 25 years or so.
Yeah, we've still got guys around. There's none of those old timers are sitting in my group in Springfield. They're up in the hill towns outside. They're up in Petersham, Mass, and the other little hill towns up in the woods. Most of them.
That's very inspiring to hear of men's groups that have this kind of longevity. You know, I interviewed Jed Diamond.
That's so funny. I was thinking of him as you said.
Yeah, and he, as you probably know, he's been in a group for 43 years. And he told me in the interview, he said, because he was talking about his third and very successful marriage of 42 years. And he said, his wife says the main key ingredient of it really working is the fact he's been in a men's group all of that time.
That's great. And that kind of segs into, you asked about relationships to women and how this works. I went through the New Warrior training in April. The woman who's now my wife went through a kind of similar process called Woman in Power in June of that year. And she had and has at her own spiritual practice. She was a yogi and a teacher and a lot of good stuff. But we both entered our relationship, did these incredibly powerful individual processes, joined our own groups.
Oh, so she's consistently been in a women's group too.
She hasn't been in a women's group for a while, but she was consistently in a women's group for a long time. And we've brought this kind of shadow work mentality and skills and tools to our relationship in a way that I think that she would probably say the same. Like, men's group has been the place that I go to process the stuff that I would otherwise be burdening my marriage with.
Exactly.
To have the connections with men so that when Kendra says, you should have a phone call, you should go connect with somebody, I've got a list of guys. What is it that I want to connect about? Who's the best guy to call?
Wow. That's invaluable, huh?
Right? And regular connections with men in my life who know me deeply, who know my relationship, who know my hangups, who know my shadows, who can point and say, well, you're doing that thing again, Boysen. What are you not taking responsibility for here? And invite me to that level of integrity in my world.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can very much resonate with that. And I'm sure that you find, and many of the men must find, that it frees up the relationship. In so many profound ways, because you're not looking for your woman in this case to provide you with everything, one human being, even though you may love her and she's beautiful, there's no way that one human being can provide you with everything you need to be happy. It's like, and I think this is one of the reasons I think men's work and obviously women's work is so essential, because in indigenous and more traditional cultures, the men and the women would have their men's and their women's culture. And that's really been lost in modern and postmodern culture. And I think obviously it's more common for women to come together in different kinds of formats. But for men, of course, we have to get over our kind of lone wolf mentality that, I don't really need anyone. I don't need any help, and all the ways that men convince themselves that, I know who I am, I know where I'm going. And the pretense of that, when of course, most men are actually very confused and afraid to admit it, because of course the big taboo for men is to be vulnerable and admit your vulnerability. But that's not necessarily a healthy thing to be doing with your partner.
That's right.
Because I know this is one of the interesting sort of themes, I think, in this kind of work, is because women often say these days, I'm thinking of Warren Farrell's book called Women Don't Hear What Men Don't Say, was the title of his book. So obviously women often get frustrated because men tend to be so cut off, and they don't really share what's really going on for them. But then on the other hand, so women generally want men to be more sensitive in that way, but on the other hand, they want us to be a strong tree. They don't want us to be collapsing and weak and like, oh, I don't know where I'm going, help me. That's what we need to go to other men for, to empower that positive masculine pole of direction, purpose, responsibility, as you were saying.
Yes.
And instead of putting all that on our partners.
Yes.
Because then it depolarizes the relationship, and then the woman might start becoming more masculine because, her man hasn't really got it together.
Yeah. And I like to unpack those terms as much as I can in, masculine and feminine. What we're talking about is a bunch of associated characteristics that have kind of been piled together.
Yeah.
Culturally, that change and shift over time and get reinforced and taught to us, programmed into us. And, here's where I would say, and a lot of what gets programmed into us is like the most basic, not helpful versions
Right.
of some of these incredibly beautiful characteristics. Like a woman giving birth, you want power, directionality, force, right? A woman giving birth, strength, like all of those things, right? My wife is an incredibly powerful woman. Thank God. We're adoptive parents, and if my wife collapsed into whatever, like that wouldn't play for us. That doesn't work. We need two strong adults with a sense of purpose and groundedness and presence in our world, right? And me having a space where I can go get that community with men, go get that sacred masculine, which isn't something I can explain. It's not something I can define. It's not something I can write out in a paragraph, but it's something that I experience in my body when I'm in the company of other men seeking to do the same.
Jed told me that line from Robert Bly, the sound that male cells sing. That's how he described it. And that I'd said to Jed, oh my God, that really captures it.
It does. I can't tell you what that is. I can't describe that for
you.
Me
neither.
And yet I understand it now. I understand what that experience feels like, and it's precious to me and sacred to me. And it also allows me the freedom to say, takes away any jealousy I might have, any hesitation or reservation I might have about my wife wanting to have that space with other women.
Right, exactly.
Right? It's like, yeah, hell yeah, I want you to have that.
Yeah.
For yourself, right?
Yeah, I think that's so positive, because one of the deep fears I think that comes up for men, and even if they think or presume themselves to be very progressive men, is to allow women to really inhabit their own power. Which is obviously demonstrated most profoundly in a woman giving birth.
Yeah.
But it's why there's a certain point in the development of our men's and women's collectives, and we all had to face as men, and I did too, that there was an unconscious kind of superiority.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yes.
and one of the ways that manifests is because when a woman really, and it's a big step for a woman too, but when she really steps into her authentic power, and obviously she becomes radiant, that there's, that we love that as men, that feminine radiance, but at the same time, she doesn't need us.
Right.
In the same way, she did before. She's on her own ground, an independence that's not separative. It's just, and I think that shakes up very deep structures for men, that they don't necessarily know are there. What you mean, you don't need me anymore? You're not relying on me, and it's
Right.
like, but for a woman to be not in this kind of more masculinized feminist mode of like, oh, I don't need you, I don't need a man, I think that's a big part of what's distorted in postmodern culture. But when a woman is actually being loved, is available to love and be loved, she's not saying, well, I don't need you in that sense, but at the same time, there is no need in that. She doesn't need you to be completed.
Right.
She's finding that fundamentally in herself, just as we as men potentially would find it amongst the song, in that song that the male cells sing. Yeah. And and there's something about then man and woman, not only in our intimate relationships, but in general, to be able to stand alone and be free from all these projections, and all this unresolved conflict that really has its roots in the fact that we don't really have a healthy male and female culture process in society anymore.
Yeah.
So I think the implications of this kind of work are far bigger than is apparent. It's not. It goes way beyond. Because there's the whole dimension of just us as individual men discovering our purpose, direction, fundamental confidence, all of that, facing your shadows. So there's the personal development dimension, but then there's the potential between men and women in intimate relationships, but also the more societal structures, what could actually shift in culture as a whole, if and when this process is really recognized and by the mass of people. I mean, imagine that.
Yes,
that would be a revolution.
Yes. Reminded of Charles Eisenstein for a moment. Do you know Charles?
Yeah, I actually met him once in at a festival in Portugal.
The more beautiful worlds our hearts know is possible, right?
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that phrase too.
Yeah, that idea that when I am doing my individual work and my partner is doing their individual work, and then we are sharing in collective spaces, these built collective spaces for where big we, transpersonal we,
exactly,
is brought forward, that creates a whole level of possibility that wasn't there before. And practice, and it's the practice, right? So, when you were saying about women stepping into their full power and how that can bring up shadows for men. So I'll just straight up own this shit, right? The more powerful my wife becomes, the more I've had to reckon with my own shadows of wanting to minimize and degrade and put down that power, because I'm scared that I'm not capable of stepping up and meeting it, being present to it.
Exactly.
Right? Whose work is that? Not hers.
Right.
My work.
Right.
Right. And vice versa.
Yeah.
and vice versa. When I step up to, I am going to be an emotionally intelligent, empowered, integrated being on my own who doesn't need a mom to process his emotions.
Exactly.
My wife has to confront that want to control
Mm.
in herself.
Right.
Right. So,
Yeah.
but it's the beautiful dance when we are conscious beings
Mm.
who can point back at it and say, oh, there it is again.
Mm.
There it is again.
Mm.
Last weekend, I stood in the kitchen of my house downstairs after my wife and I had been butting heads about something. And I just stood in the kitchen and said, no, I get to be the victim here. Right. When we got to the point where it was like, oh, fuck, there it is again. No, I get to be the victim here. And she's like, no, you don't. I get to be the victim here. No, you don't. And that was it, right? It released the spell.
Exactly. Because you voiced it.
It released the codependence. It released the thing. So that it's like, okay, now what's really going on? And
Yeah.
what can we do together?
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. That's a great example. Because then also you can you can bring humor to the
Humor's
absolutely
humor's it.
yeah.
Yeah, humor's it. The having the archetypal jester show up in the relationship from either of us
Mm.
when it's most needed, I think is what has allowed us to, in some ways survive
Yeah.
the parenting and trauma and what we've had to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned when you mentioned there about the in that case about the woman wanting to be mummy, and that's a whole other dimension that we've gone quite deeply into as well. It's one way it's described is Oedipal patterning conditioning, which all has to do with how we were shaped by our own relationship with our mothers and fathers,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very common syndrome, particularly here in Portugal, because it's a more traditional culture. And of course, it's more patriarchal than Northern Europe or North America. So the sons tend to be glorified by the mothers, but then what happens is and a lot of them don't leave home until quite late in life. It's also a different economic reality here. So
Mm-hmm.
often they don't leave home until they meet their wife, their future wife, and then of course the wife ends up becoming mummy. And,
Right.
and meanwhile, the young adult hasn't really actualized or gone through a healthy period of autonomy,
Yes.
So, that's one pattern that showed up a lot. And then another one is in relationship to me as the leader, and obviously at times I'm really pushing individuals and kicking their ass, as we call it. And some of what some men have had to work through is them projecting their father, that having had an authoritarian father,
Yeah.
and everything that brings up,
Yep.
and and just the childish, both the childish adapt the way we're still like children, but also and then the way we're like adolescents, which is more the other way. It's like in reaction to or being attached to one's false independence.
Right.
Oh, I don't need you, that kind of thing. So that's that's also a large dimension of our work is observing, understanding, and transcending the ways in which we're still children and adolescents.
Yeah. And living out that conditioning, that programming that we got from all of these sources.
Exactly. Yeah.
When we were younger, including mass media, including our schools and teachers, including our church, including, you know, all of those different patterns that we got. So am I awake? Am I mature enough to see when I'm being influenced? And am I brave enough to be in community where other people can call me out when they see that?
Yeah, that's such a big aspect of this, I think, especially for men, is being willing to be challenged by other men and going beyond, just, you know, that whole layer of competition, arrogance. Generally, what I find with men is that once a man fundamentally trusts the container,
yes,
and that song that the male cells sing is being felt, you know, it's relatively easy for them to discover a trust and vulnerability that they never even imagined possible.
Totally agree with that. And also becomes easier with practice over time to reproduce that, right? I become able to co-create that container with other people. But that's the point of no return. At some point, when you start doing this work, I hit a place where I looked back in mid 2005 and knew there was no way that I could go back to the way that I had been living before. That was a liberating and terrifying moment. Yeah.
You know, they have this phrase in India in relationship to the spiritual path: it's better not to start than to start and not finish.
That's well said.
Because once you start, you know, well, the implications of running away or denying is so much greater, you know, on your soul, so to speak. You know, so yeah, you have to realize what you're getting into.
Yeah,
it has big implications. Maybe just as a last question to wrap up, in light of everything you've discovered and shared, what would you say are the biggest challenges for men in this process? Of course, it would vary a lot between individuals, but do you find there's repeating, more impersonal, let's say, patterning that often comes up for men, and also has the most profound liberating effect when it's really gone beyond?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of being inspired by Jonathan Haidt's work that I'm digging into right now. But escaping from Homo economicus.
That's interesting. Can you explain what that means?
So Haidt talks about Homo economicus is like the human species that is based in transaction, that is always based in, I am going to do whatever it takes to just get more. Right? Not a Homo sapiens sapiens, right? Not thinking man, connected man, interrelated man. But I think that for so many of us, for me certainly, like I was so trapped in the mindset of I have to be an independent man, I have to perform in such a way that I will get this. All of my relationships are transactional. I give you this, you give me this. If our relationship transactions become uneven, then I will hurt you in some way or disconnect myself from you, right? So this idea of just material accumulation, material achievement, making it, yeah, right? So many men, I was, and I judge that so many men are so locked in that samsara, so locked in that hiddenness, that it takes a lot to crack that open. And we build whole ego structures, we build whole armors around ourselves to prevent others from seeing us as frail, vulnerable, weak, all of these things that we judge and that I judged and I put into my shadow and I hid from other people
Yeah.
for so long.
Yeah.
Breaking out of that is terrifying, and it's traitorous. It's traitorous to our whole way of life.
Right. That's
In
a
the
very
West,
powerful way to put it. You can almost feel like you're betraying yourself.
you are betraying your culture. You're betraying the commercial identity that you were told that you have to have. You're betraying manhood. You know, the bros are not going to like it if you start owning your feelings.
Right.
It's terrifying and liberating to go through that curtain.
Yeah, beautiful. That's very powerful about how you transmitted that. I think it speaks to what I was just saying earlier, which I feel also is the biggest challenge, is it's letting down that guard, that armoring that, most men don't even know it's there, and they don't realize how many layers there are to it. And to gradually see those layers being peeled away over time in a men's collective, it's really quite something.
It is.
And then you see that that weakness, because the fear of weakness is just the ego's interpretation of vulnerability. But then, of course, we discover that it's in vulnerability that we find true strength.
Yes.
And it's in humility that we find power. And it's not through pride, And in fact, underneath pride is weakness, because we're holding ourselves together. We're putting up our armor. We're trying to be somebody that we aren't really.
Yeah.
We've just forgotten, So it's a very, very raw, both raw. Sometimes I find it's very, very raw and wild and intense, and sometimes it's so tender. And that's another quality, for men, because there's all the warriorship, of men coming together in that potency of the masculine. But when you experience that tenderness and deep love between men, it's really something sacred.
Yeah, yes, we do a lot of talking about the king, warrior, lover, magician kind of archetype circle, but there's also, inside that lover and inside that warrior and inside that king and inside that magician, there's nurturers.
Right.
Yeah, masculinity is tender. Masculinity is soft,
right,
and warm,
right,
and holds and present, and it's all that, right? Like you said something about, what is this about toxic masculinity and this kind of bad rap, and I think primarily that's because we've gotten lost and pretended that masculinity is only this group of characteristics.
Yeah, exactly.
And frankly, if you think masculinity is just dominance and violence and overshadowing hierarchies and abuse, right? It's all true. It's all true. And that ain't all.
Right.
Open it up.
Right.
Go underneath it. Go through it to see what else is there and to get at all of the juicy and beautiful parts of this sacred masculinity, this whole masculinity that we can embrace and that women are totally on board with.
Yeah, women are longing for it.
Yeah, they don't want emotional men who are going to collapse into relying on them to do all their emotional work and being their mommies and taking care of them and doing all that, right? No, that's not what women are wanting. Women want emotionally responsible whole men.
They've got a strong spine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Present.
Yeah.
Present.
Yeah. And on purpose. Well, fantastic talking to you, Boyson. Really enjoyed it. I feel like we resonate on so many levels.
I'll stop by tomorrow and have coffee.
Okay, you can just beam over anytime you like.
Just drop in. Yeah, I wish it were that easy. This has been very enjoyable. Yes, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's stay in touch, and maybe we'll do another one and go more deeply into another theme, related theme. All right. Thank you very much.